Excuse Me While I Kiss This Guy by Icka M Chif. Mischief. Read by Frullama. It was an old Highland custom, one that Sidon barely half remembered from before the calamity had happened, of a Highland pressing their mouth to the back of a person's hand. He remembered Mifia's fond giggles, as someone had once done it to her in farewell, and the gesture seemed an appropriate way to honor Link as he departed to take on the next divine beast. "Remember," he said, kneeling down and taking Link's hand in his. It was so tiny compared to Sidon's, yet so strong and fierce. He pressed his lips to the back of Link's bare hand, careful of his teeth, just a bare brush of contact. He looked up at Link's face, trying to radiate sincerity and determination. "I believe in you, and you are always welcome back in the Zora's domain." Link's response was for his face to turn the color of Sidon's scales, his eyes round as he stared at Sidon. Perhaps he had misremembered the custom? He was pretty sure he had it right. Or maybe it hadn't been a Highland? Sidon tried not to fidget or let his uncertainty show. There had been many non-Zora in the domain at the time. He may have gotten the cultures mixed up. And he had been quite small back then. Then Link curled his hand around Sidon's fingers, his shoulders shaking as he laughed silently. One hand came up, fingertips touching Link's chin, then coming down as if presenting his hand to Sidon. "Thank you," he signed, the first purely happy grin on his face that Sidon had ever seen. "You are quite welcome." Sidon smiled broadly, his tail fin waving happily. He wanted to see more of Link's smiles like that, the small Highland having become quite dear to him in the short amount of time they had spent together. Unfortunately, the world needed saving, and the smile faded from Link's face, like the sun hiding behind the clouds that had so recently covered the domain. Sidon missed it already. Link gave Sidon's fingers a squeeze, then stepped back. It was a heavy responsibility for his friend to carry by himself, and Sidon wished he had a way to lighten Link's burden, to bring more smiles back to the champion's face. He stood up to give Link some space as the Highland took the Sheikah slate from his hip and tapped the screen. Sidon wasn't quite sure what that would do, but it gave him a moment to think about what he could do to help his friend. Then he realized it. "When you come back, I shall give you as many kisses as you want." Sidon grinned brightly, his tail fin wagging slightly in eagerness as blue light began to envelop their champion. "Wherever you want." The last thing he saw before Link disappeared was his very round blue eyes, only a shade brighter than the magic that carried him away. Ah, teleportation. That was a handy way to travel indeed. Did he trip? Just before he teleported away? Muzu wondered out loud, looking almost startled. Baz and Sidon exchanged a look. "Not likely," Sidon said firmly, Baz nodding in agreement. Link was a great warrior after all, and Sidon had the utmost faith in his skills. Still, he hoped that his words helped Link, and that he would see the fierce wild warrior again. The alarming stench of something being burnt had Sidon rushing towards the Nezyoma shrine. Several guards followed him, lances at the ready in case it was some sort of attack, although there wasn't much that was flammable in the domain, in case whatever was burning decided to spread. Well, aside from the Zora themselves. "Get everyone out of here," Sidon ordered Baz, who saluted and started directing the guards to move the civilians out of the area. Sidon sprinted around Mifia's statue, trident in hand, in time to see a masked figure wobbly step out of the shrine. The figure was short, only about half Sidon's height, and covered completely in some sort of thick, bulky armor that was smoking. Sidon nearly gagged at being so close to the source of the stench. He was about to demand the person identify themselves when the figure reached up, pulling off the squarish helm, revealing a tangled mat of golden hair. "Link?" Sidon gasped in surprise. He could hear the guards behind him pull to a halt, everyone staring at the exhausted-looking champion. "Where in Hyrule did you just come from?" He meant it as hyperbole, but somehow it came across as a bit of a surprise when Link answered, his gestures clunky with the thick gloves and armor he was wearing. "Death Mountain." "My goodness! Then Varudana?" Link nodded, tilting slightly in exhaustion. He looked at the assorted guards and then up at Sidon with a worried, almost confused expression. Link's lips moved in question, but no words came out. Of course, this was not the kind of polite, proper greeting that Sidon prided the Zora people with. "Stand down." Sidon waved a hand to the guards. "It's the champion." "Of course," Baz nodded, giving Link a small grin before shooing everyone away. Sidon waited a moment for the crowd to disperse a bit before stepping forward to talk to Link, who looked like he was about to fall over. "Welcome back, my dearest friend," Sidon said, trying not to bounce in excitement. He didn't think Link would actually take him up on his offer and return. He had hoped, of course, but to have his private wish fulfilled was completely different. Although he probably should have known, given that they had just spotted a second light that appeared from the sky, signaling the divine beast had joined Varuda in freedom from the Calamity Ganon's corruption. Link gave him a perplexed look, glancing at the last of the guards, then back up at Sidon. "Of course, you are always welcome here," Sidon waved Link's concern away. "We were just alarmed by the—" He waved his hand, trying to figure out a diplomatic way to say stench. This close, it was actually worse, like the charred meat and singed hair. Link's expression turned knowing, pointing to his armor, or himself. It was hard to distinguish in either case. Sidon cleared his throat. "Bath?" he offered brightly. Link nodded quickly, looking eager to get clean. Sidon laughed, reaching to assist his friend, and Link held a gloved hand up, shying away. "Too hot," Link clumsily signed, the gloves not allowing for the useful, graceful movements. "Burn you." "Ah," Sidon nodded, touched that Link was worried about his safety. "Shall I escort you to the place where you may bathe and rest? We will worry about formalities with Father afterwards." King Dorephan would not mind waiting for Link to bathe before giving a chance to greet him, not when Link's ponytail was sticking out the back of his skull with pungent sweat. It wasn't the worst of smells, but it wasn't entirely pleasant either. Link gave him a grateful look, then held up a hand, reaching over his shoulder to undo the flap of the pack on his back. He reached into it, and suddenly his clothing seemed to flicker and change, showing flashes of skin, a glimpse of a body underneath the odd Hylian clothing. There was a bit of definition to the muscles, deceptively weak and soft-looking. But Link's strength was not one that was easily apparent to the eye, as Sidon himself knew, having fallen into the trap upon first meeting the champion. The smoking armor vanished. Various other clothing appeared and disappeared on Link's body until the only thing he was wearing was a pair of trousers and a worn, plain, loose shirt. Link seemed to breathe a sigh of relief at the change in attire. Sidon tilted his head to the side. Where did the armor go? It had been there. Then it wasn't. Link gave him a blank look, then shrugged. "It'll be there when I need it again," he signed, much more fluently without his gloves. He hesitated a second, then looked Sidon over. "Isn't that how you change your clothes?" "No." Sidon shook his head. "No, it was not." Sidon had to manually put on and remove his garments. As far as he was aware, that was how most people changed what they wore. Possibly a culture difference? Let me show you the baths, Sidon said, shaking off the awkward moment. Afterwards, a nice soak in the recovery springs should put a bounce in your step. Link smiled tiredly at him, and Sidon's chest gave a happy flutter. Thank you. A soft footstep caught Sidon's attention as he waited at Mifia's statue for Link to come out of the baths. He turned to find Link walking up to him, scuffling his steps just a bit, so his approach would be heard. It was a minor thing, but something that Sidon was quietly grateful for. Welcome back, dear friend, he smiled, feeling something ease at seeing Link looking so much better than he had previously. Clean and back in champion's clothing, minus his weapons. Sidon was quite pleased that Link felt comfortable enough in the domain to forego carrying them. Did you have a good soak? Link smiled back and pointed at his head. Without a further thought, Sidon leaned over, pressing his lips to the top of Link's head, kissing it. Link's hair was an odd texture against his lips, very unlike Zora's skin, and he could pick up the lingering scent of soap and the recovery springs. He straightened up, trying to keep his fins from wiggling in amusement, only to be met with a slack-jawed, wide-eyed look of surprise on Link's face. Link blinked a few times, expression clearly settling on confused as he hesitantly signed, "I'm clean?" "Ah!" Sidon felt his face heat up, feeling foolish at his eagerness. "My apologies. I assumed you remembered my promise, and meant—" He pointed to the top of his own head. Link made a gasping sound, clutching his stomach, as he burst out in silent laughter. "I forgot," he signed, his fingers moving like the flickering of minnows. "Oh dear," Sidon fretted. "What an error to make. Truly, my most sincere and humble apologies. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Link waved his hands, waving away Sidon's concerns with a bright grin. It wasn't the incandescent one he had the first time Sidon had kissed his hand, but rather one full of mirth, which was nearly as good. He patted Sidon's arm, just above the gauntlets, almost as high as he could reach on Sidon's much larger form. "I liked it," Link assured him, the faintest bit of blush on his cheeks. "Then I'm glad. I would not want to damage our friendship, my treasured friend." Sidon relaxed and smiled back. Link looked like he was laughing again, in his silent way. "It would take more than that," Link assured him, then glanced up at Mifia's statue, the merriment fading from his expression. "My apologies if I'm the one intruding." "No, I often come here." Sidon shook his head, glancing up at his sister's face again. "To think and to contemplate. It helps give me perspective when I'm trying to find solutions to problems." He'd once come to ruminate on the parts of his life that she was missing. He wondered if she would look the same now, 100 years later, or if she'd be bigger, taller, like he had grown. He wondered if she'd be proud of him, the Zora he'd become. As he got older, he found himself coming here to seek her guidance, trying to figure out what she would do, see other perspectives to find solutions to the burdens he carried. Van Ruta may have not been a problem anymore, thanks to Link's assistance, but until all Hyrule was cleared of the calamity Ganon's blight, there were many plans for the future that were not currently feasible. He did not blame Link for the wait, as what he was doing was both incredibly courageous and dangerous, but being stuck in wait-and-see mode never sat well with Sidon. A sudden flash of light made him turn back towards the Highland, to discover Link offering him a glowing sphere with an earnest expression on his face. It took a second to realize that the champion of Hyrule was giving him a bomb to attack whatever troubled him with. A bomb that Sidon had no idea where Link might have acquired. "Ah," Sidon floundered for a moment. "May I assume this means the rumors of a half-naked Highland spreading fires across the landscape to be you?" That is not what he meant to say. Truly, he needed to attend more classes in diplomacy if this was how he talked to guests of the domain. Alarm flashed across Link's face for a moment, before turning thoughtful. Finally, Link just shrugged, looking nonchalant at the mention of possible random destruction he might have caused. Sidon wondered if this meant the rumors of a bear on fire running through the woods was not as exaggerated as he had previously thought it to be. Especially considering Link was silently offering Sidon a bomb again. He was starting to get the impression that Link may be a pyromaniac. Thank you, Link, but no. His worries were not the kind that could be diffused with firepower, unless he was willing to explode his own skull. While tempting, it would not solve anything. Link nodded. The bomb was gone as suddenly as it appeared. Sidon couldn't tell where it had gone. After a moment's thought, decided it was a mystery best left unasked. You are a marvel, my friend. Sidon shook his head and smiled, touched by the champion's thoughtfulness, though he was slightly disturbed by the revelation of Link's tendency towards pyromania. Thankfully, being made of stone and water, there was little Link could do to harm the domain in that regard. Link just shrugged and smiled back, looking pleased, and Sidon found himself grinning in return, feeling brighter than he had since Gerudo's return. This was not quite what he intended by his offer for Link to return, but it did seem to be working. Perhaps he didn't need the diplomacy refresher after all. A flicker of blue light from the shrine caught Sidon's attention, and his heart leapt into his throat, wondering if it was Link, given that the third light had illuminated the sky, signaling the freedom of yet another divine beast. It probably was. The temptation was there to run and enthusiastically greet his friend, but he was a prince of the domain, and Zora were proud people. He was supposed to lead by example, be polite, dignified. Sidon caught a glimpse of a pointy ear and a small stature. "Link!" he jubilantly cheered, throwing his hands in the air. Link waved back, but Sidon couldn't read his expression with the fabric that covered his face from his eyes down. Sidon tilted his head to the side, trying to make sense of the clothing Link was wearing. It seemed odd for armor, given that his abdomen was completely bare, as were his shoulders, and from the knees down, where greaves would normally cover. "That is a very interesting outfit, my dear friend. I'm not entirely certain that I understand it," Sidon commented, then hastened to assure Link. "Well, given that the Zora do not wear clothing, I'm sure." Link held a hand up, laughing in his silent way. "It's Gerudo," Link signed, his gesture sloppy from his amusement. "I dressed as a—" Sidon didn't understand the gesture Link made. "In order to enter their town." "I'm afraid I didn't catch that sign," Sidon apologized, trying to replicate it in the best he could. V-A-I, Link slowly signed each letter, then repeated the gesture he'd made the first time. "A Gerudo woman." "Oh, yes. I recall that Gerudo tend to be female only." Sidon nodded, understanding dawning. Not Highland, then. Given the hot climate of the desert that Zora could not venture into, Gerudo culture or clothing was not something he knew much about. The fabric is quite pretty. It looked so thin and light, and yet there were detailed patterns woven into the material. "Thank you," Link signed, giving Sidon an impish look, giving a small spin so Sidon could see everything. There was quite a bit of jewelry with the outfit as well, making a soft chiming noise as Link moved. The gold was pretty and matched Link's hair, although Sidon was personally more fond of silver. Perhaps the difference was a cultural preference. He'd never questioned it before. "I got another outfit there, too," Link signed, reaching into his pouch on his hip and touching it. The Vi outfit disappeared, to be replaced by one that showed even more of Link's chest than the first one, although it did have more in the way of armor, covering one arm and his lower legs. "This one is V-O-E," Link spelled out each letter again, then made a strange gesture that Sidon assumed meant the same thing. Male Gerudo clothing. I thought Gerudo were only women, Sidon asked, confused. At least that's what he remembered reading, finding the concept to be a little strange at the time. Mostly, Link agreed. The lack of veil, meaning Sidon could see his amused smirk, and Sidon had the feeling that there was a story there that he was not entirely sure he wanted to hear. Or maybe he did. It was a little difficult to decide with that look on Link's face. Something glittery on the side of Link's face caught his eye, the high ponytail showing off Link's long, elegant ears. He leaned down to see the shiny thing that was dangling from Link's ear. He vaguely remembered Link having his ears pierced with blue hoops before, but these shimmering drops of gold and stone were new. There was a Gerudo smith named Isha who can make clothing that works like potions, only they don't wear off, Link signed, then removed one of the earrings, putting it in Sidon's hand with a sly smile. They were gold teardrops with round opals that shimmered like water in the light. Pretty, but not a color Sidon would have normally thought to associate with Link. For the next time we go swimming, they're enchanted to increase my speed. I might win. Sidon laughed. He had no doubt that these trinkets would do as Link said, but he doubted that it would be enough for Link to win. Still, he was touched that Link had obviously bought them while thinking of Sidon. He handed it back to Link, who fastened it back to his ear. I got this too, Link signed, touching his pouch again. Link's hairstyle returned to his usual low ponytail, earrings hidden by the fall of hair on either side of his face. Link lifted up the fringe that covered his forehead, showing off a glinting red spot. For a moment, Sidon was worried that it was a wound. Then he realized that it was a ruby set in silver, attached to a beaded leather cord. Protection from cold. I'll need it in Mount Laniru. I remember hearing that it was quite cold there, my friend, Sidon murmured, touching the red stone, reassuring himself that it is not actually blood. Zora Sapphire would look much better, would be a better match for Warrior, the same shimmering shade of blue as Link's eyes. He looked Link over for any other wounds, and realizing that some of the marks he'd seen on Link's skin weren't decorative, like he had assumed with the Vi outfit, but scars. There were a lot of scars, now that he was looking. He brushed a finger across Link's bare arm, down the slight dark lines that looked like coral branches running from his shoulder and down to his elbow. The marks there were familiar, but he'd never seen them on a pale Highland skin before. You have been struck with electricity. Sidon could not disguise the heaviness in his heart and his voice. Some Zora bore similar marks after having attempted to use shock arrows on Gerudo. Even just brushing up against the arrows could cause such damage. There were other scars on Link's skin now that he was looking. He followed the marks on his shoulder onto Link's back, Link slowly turning so Sidon could see. Slash marks, such as from claws or swords, were most common on Link's body, but there were remains of other injuries, such as the aftermath of burns that marred Link's soft golden skin. How did this happen? He asked quietly, aching for the pain that his friend must have gone through. Link turned just enough that Sidon could see his gestures. I was being pulled by a sand seal while surfing on my shield, shooting bomb arrows at a giant camel, while Riju tried to keep us all from being struck by lightning. Sidon stared, trying to comprehend what Link had just said. He had no idea what a sand seal, a camel, or a Riju was. After a moment, he decided the details were unimportant, as he got the gist of it. It was probably somewhat familiar to the situation where Link had ridden on Sidon's back while shooting shock arrows at Gerudo. Link nudged Sidon. I'm fine, he signed, clearly annoyed. Sidon sighed. I know. He reassured his friend. As confident as Sidon was in his own fighting skills and the strength of the Zora, he was not confident it would be enough to best Link, should they ever find themselves against each other in the field of battle. You are a mighty warrior, of much skill, but that does not prevent me from worrying about you, my dear friend. He kissed the burn mark on Link's bare shoulder, feeling the slightly raised marks against his lips. Link was much too impulsive and rash, and seemed to have no preservation skills. One of his guards, Groove, recently confessed to Sidon and Baz that he'd witnessed Link diving off the top of Shatterback Point after collecting shock arrows for the Lionel before going up against Varuda. The image gave Sidon nightmares. It's called Shatterback for a reason. Sidon himself had seen the aftermath of both confronting the Lionel and the foolish jumps off the top of Plomus Mountain too many times before. Link shivered at the gentle contact. It was probably too cold in the domain for Link to be wearing such clothing, even with the ruby circlet. That being said, do not forget that I believe in you, Sidon said, standing up, and that I shall be cheering you on as ever. However, I do believe a soak in the recovery springs would do you no harm. The wounds were healed, and Sidon could not smell blood on Link, but the healing properties of the springs would help with any remaining recovery. If nothing else, they were hot springs, and could warm Link up. Link shrugged, as if there was the possibility they might, then laughed at the look on Sidon's face, following after with a bounce in his step. Sidon could not protect Link from all that he faced, but he would do all that he could to ease his friend's pain before he left again.